Several years ago, Elder Oakes visited Africa. In the country of Nigeria, he observed how Muslims were being slowly integrated into the church and stated to the 12 on return, "I believe the Lord is sending us to school in Nigeria, helping us learn what we need to learn to prepare to take the gospel to the Muslim nations." Subsequently, President Packer organized an Islamic working group consisting of Elder Oakes, Elder Holland, Elder Piper, and Elder Kieran. In August, Elder Carden, on his return from his service in Africa, was added to the group. The charge to the group was to prepare to take the gospel to the Islamic world. The presentation today will review or provide some background on Islam and then a report on the work of the group as undertaken to date.
We're grateful, the Islamic Working Group is grateful for this opportunity to present to you today on the topic, the Church and Islam. Today, Elder Carden will begin by giving us some scriptural and prophetic declarations associated with Islam. Elder Kieran will then provide information about the development of Islam, and then we'll discuss our efforts at outreach and building relationships and some of the current efforts in proselyting those who are of the Muslim faith. Finally, we'll discuss some of our findings and look forward to what we might do in the future. And we welcome your thoughts and insights at that point. So we'll start with Elder Carden.
Thank you, Elder Piper. In response to his pleadings with the Lord for posterity and the blessings of the priesthood, the Lord showed Abraham the heavens and
louder.
The Lord showed Abraham the heavens and said, "Look now toward heaven and count the stars. So shall thy seed be. And in thy seed after thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed, even with the blessings of the gospel." Abraham's firstborn son was to Hagar, Sarah's handmaid. While pregnant, Hagar fled from Sarah's wrath into the wilderness and was visited by an angel who told her to return. The angel told her she would have a son and to name him Ishmael, meaning God hears. The Lord told her further that her seed would be multiplied exceedingly, and it shall not be numbered for multitude. Later the Lord told Abraham regarding Ishmael, "I have blessed him, and will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation." The Lord blessed Ishmael's posterity. They prospered and spread throughout the Arabian Peninsula. In 1974, President Kimball taught the regional representatives of the 12, saying, quote, "It seems to me that the Lord chose his words when he said, every nation, every land, uttermost bounds of the earth, every tongue, every people, every soul, all the world, many lands. Surely there is significance in these words," close quote. With these thoughts in mind, we now look at the rise of Islamic nations. Elder Kieran.
Muhammad was born in Mecca in 570 AD. His father died before he was born, and his mother died when he was around 6 years old. He was raised by various relatives, including his uncle. His upbringing included experience in shepherding and trading. In 610 AD, at the age of 40, Muhammad, while meditating in a cave near Mecca, claims to have been visited and taught by the angel Gabriel. In subsequent years, he received other visits and teachings. These teachings were written and compiled into a book that we now know as the Quran. Muhammad lived most of his life between the cities of Mecca and Medina. When he fled from Mecca to Medina with his followers to escape persecution in 622 AD, the event became known as the Hijra, or the beginning of Islam, and became the first year of the Muslim calendar. Before his death in 632 AD, Muhammad had united most of the tribes in the Arabian Peninsula. As you know, Islam has 5 pillars. The first is Shahada, their profession of faith, being that there is no God but God and Muhammad is his messenger. The second, Salat, refers to their 5 daily prayers. The third, Zakat, to almsgiving. Fourth, Al-Sawm, fasting, particularly during Ramadan, but at other times too. And the fifth, Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, which they're expected to conduct at least once in a lifetime. The Quran is about the same length as the New Testament and contains many events and prophets familiar to Christians and Jews. It's not an historical narrative, but a collection of what the Muslims believe to be God's teaching with no overall theme. Islam expanded northward and westward along the Mediterranean, southward and eastward through Asia by a mixture of conquest and trade. The spread of Islam began shortly after the death of Muhammad. In the first centuries, conversion to Islam followed the rapid growth of the Muslim world created by the conquest of the caliphs. Muslim dynasties were soon established and subsequent empires were among the largest in the world. The people of the Islamic world created numerous sophisticated centers of culture and science with far-reaching mercantile networks, contributing to what became known as the Golden Age of Islam. The majority of Muslims, about 90%, are Sunnis, and they follow Muhammad's example. The other 10% are Shiites, who follow Muhammad's cousin and brother-in-law in the family line. In around 700 AD, there was a schism over succession and incorporation of non-Quranic elements. While we share a number of broad beliefs, it may be helpful to identify where we differ. For the Muslims, God is one God, the everlasting refuge. He has taken no wife. He has not begotten, nor been begotten, and equal to him is none other, as they say. Muhammad is considered to be the seal of the prophets, which is most often interpreted to mean the last of the prophets, but could also be interpreted as the authentic or confirming seal. It's worth noting that a majority of committed Muslims cherish warm family bonds and for the most part are very hospitable to non-Muslims living among them. Today, there are a number of flashpoints with Islam around the world. Often this relates to some form of extremism. Extremism, in turn, is often associated with jihad, and to most Muslims, jihad refers to an inner striving for cleansing, but it has been assumed by a minority to reflect a more outward holy war. In westernized cultures, tensions are often most apparent where the arrival of Islam in a nation or a region is in its first or second generation. More than 60% of the world's 2 billion Christians live between the 10th and 40th parallels, along with half the world's 1.6 billion Muslims. Touchpoints in places like Sudan, Nigeria, Indonesia, Malaysia and the Philippines are where Christians and Islam often collide, or can collide. Economic and demographic tensions have played their role in this too. One of the assertions of groups like Al-Qaeda is that Islam is in danger at the hands of the West. This next map, illustrates countries where Muslim population, where the Muslim proportion of the population is over 50% of the total. Globally, the rate of growth in the number of Muslims is projected to increase at twice the rate of non-Muslims and increase by approximately 35% over the next 20 years, from 1.6 billion to 2.2 billion. However, in terms of the world's total population, this would represent an increase from 23.4% Muslim to 26.4% by 2030. Despite the dire predictions of a Muslim demographic takeover, particularly by politicians in Europe, the Muslim population of the continent is projected to grow from 6% currently to 8% by 2030. Pakistan is projected to surpass Indonesia as the country with the world's largest population at 256 million. In the United States, the Muslim population is projected to increase from 0.8% to 1.7% of the population putting it on a par with the percentage of Jews or Latter-day Saints.
The expanding Muslim and church presence in the U.S. and the world means that these two faiths and their adherents are increasingly coming into contact with each other. The Islamic Working Group has begun to identify points of contact, patterns, and successes, and look at ways that they can be expanded. The purpose of our efforts is to, 1, understand Islam better, 2, build better relationships, and 3, better educate our members about Islam. An important aspect of reaching out to Islam is to have core materials about the church and its teachings in the principal languages of Islam. An analysis of what we have currently indicates that we could reach approximately 80% of Muslims with our Latter-day Scriptures and basic church materials that are already completed or in process of translation. It's important to continue this work so that these tools can be available to educate Muslims about the church now and to help preach the gospel in the future. The Lord continues to raise up men and women to perform this work, another witness that He is involved in the details of the kingdom. In a meeting 2 years ago with the head of the non-Muslim religions in Iraq, Mr. Abdullah, he told me, "The problem with you is that nobody knows about you. You need to send me more copies of the Book of Mormon." The problem is that it is impossible to send materials into many Muslim nations. With materials in key Islamic languages available and in preparation, the IWG, our Islamic Working Group, is carefully exploring ways to extend their reach to the Muslim populations. Utilizing the LDS.org platform, area presidencies are using simple language landing pages that contain basic materials about the church. This modest Arabic language landing page was posted several months ago. Those requesting copies of the Book of Mormon from closed countries previously were told we just couldn't send a copy to them. Now we simply refer them to the website. The page is receiving an average of about 500 hits a month from countries such as Egypt, Iraq, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, Tunisia, and Qatar. In addition, Arab members are now linking the landing page to their Facebook pages and sharing it through other social media. The Islamic Working Group has also begun exploring the interactions of church members and institutions with Islam. This includes discussions with public affairs, area presidencies, universities, and other organizations. Our objective is to identify and develop relationships with persons of influence within the Islamic community, both domestically and internationally, and I'll today discuss 2 examples of those efforts. Brigham Young University provides a wealth of experience and contacts with Islam developed through personal relationships of professors, academic programs, and research efforts in many nations. We are trying to appropriately leverage this storehouse wherever possible. One of the great nuggets in the storehouse is the Islamic Translation Series. This operates within the framework of the Neil A. Maxwell Center for Religious Scholarship. The initiative selects classic texts of literary and scientific value from the Golden Age of Islam and utilizes world-class scholars to translate them and print them in a side-by-side format in Arabic and English. This initiative makes texts available for the first time in the non-Arab speaking world and helps to build bridges between Eastern and Western scholars. 11 volumes have been translated and published to date. These volumes have been presented to scholars and government officials as a demonstration of the Church's respect for Islam and a commitment to dialogue and interfaith harmony. Another example is the upcoming exhibit of Islamic art at the BYU Art Museum. From late February through September of 2012, BYU will host this unique in all the world exhibit. The working group has recognized the potential that this exhibit has to expand outreach using and will use the opportunity to build relationships with key Muslim community leaders in the U.S. and to familiarize them with the church and its teachings. It also has plans to help use this exhibit to educate church members regarding Muslim culture and teachings.
Thank you, Elder Piper. Current church policy permits Muslims to be taught and baptized in countries where there is broad, constitutionally protected religious freedom, provided the candidate has citizenship in one of these countries or a long-term visa, is pursuing long-term residence in a country where the church is established and freedom of religion is permitted, and has no known family members who would violently oppose or retaliate against the conversion. When these conditions are met, with careful supervision from the mission president, including specific instructions to the candidate regarding risk and other things, Muslim investigators may be taught and baptized. Please note, however, that the current policy also states that only Muslims who approach the church or who are encountered during routine proselyting may be taught. The policy specifically states that there should be no outreach programs directed toward Muslim populations or neighborhoods. The church is now present with organized units or humanitarian efforts in more than 170 countries and territories, represented here in blue. In the vast majority of these countries, Muslims could be taught and baptized under the current policy if encountered during routine proselyting activities. The countries represented here in green are where we are not proselyting Muslims. Although we do not keep records on the prior religion of our converts, the records of the church indicate that based on their place of birth and other circumstances, there are approximately 20 to 25,000 members who may have converted from Islam. We don't know the full scope of what is happening in countries where we are teaching and baptizing Muslims, but we are beginning to study and understand more. We would like to share with you what we are learning, and in a few minutes we will also share a few personal stories that exemplify some of these things. During the past several weeks, members of the Islamic Working Group visited separately 2 missions where there are large concentrated Iranian populations, and visited with the mission presidents, the missionaries, and a few converts and investigators. Elder Karen visited Los Angeles and found that, consistent with the current policy, there are no outreach programs to the Muslim population there, and that accordingly, there's virtually no missionary activity among them. The missionaries reported teaching Muslims very rarely and doing so only in English, with only 1 or 2 baptisms per year. Perhaps understandably, the mission president is somewhat daunted by the current Muslim policy. In visiting Toronto, we learned that the circumstances there are quite different. In 2007, while presiding over the mission, President Tad R. Collister wrote a letter to church headquarters seeking direction and permission to baptize a few Persian investigators and authorization to expand proselyting work among them. In response, he received verbal authorization from Elder Robert S. Wood. Thus, a measured, monitored work among the Persians began. With the help of a former stake president who is an attorney working on immigration matters with the Canadian government, careful attention was given to visa, immigration, and residency matters. A few infilled elders were assigned to learn Farsi, and active proselyting efforts began. The current mission president, now infilled only a few months, actively supports this effort. He has refined the monitoring of the policy principles considerably, and has 4 elders who are learning Farsi and teaching Persian investigators regularly. These fine elders are respectful of Islam, and they simply do not teach anyone who is not openly interested in learning about the church. Almost exclusively, those they are teaching are friends of Persian members. On average, just from these 4 elders, about 40 Persians per year are joined in the church in this mission. The converts are readily assimilated and welcomed into the local units by the members.
Now we would like to show you and share with you the stories of several Muslim converts to help you see the diversity of those that have joined the church, both in culture and in country. Mohammed Al-Rehaief is from Baghdad, Iraq. In 2003, after the U.S. invasion, Mohammed was visiting the hospital where his wife worked. As he walked down a hall, he saw in one of the rooms U.S. Army Private Jessica Lynch, who had been captured by Iraqi forces. At great risk to his own life, he reported what he had seen to the U.S. Marine headquarters, helped diagram the hospital for them, and led them to her. After the rescue in March of 2003, Mohammed and his wife and 2 children were granted asylum in the United States to protect them from retribution. In early 2010, Mohammed was standing outside an electronics store trying to figure out how to use a new smartphone he had just purchased. He asked 2 young men passing by in white shirts and ties for help. They soon began teaching him. The pivotal moment in Mohammed's conversion occurred when he watched Finding Faith in Christ, the video. When he finished, Mohammed had tears in his eyes and declared that Jesus Christ was much greater than the Prophet Muhammad, who never walked on water, raised the dead, or healed the sick. Mohammed was baptized in Virginia on 15 May 2010, and several of his friends have accepted the invitation to hear the lessons. His wife has not yet joined the church.
Next is Bulut. Bulent was born and raised in Istanbul, Turkey, and in his 20s moved to Salt Lake City in 1997 to work with the 2002 Winter Olympics. He grew up in a Muslim family, learnt Arabic, read the Quran, and attended mosque. He had an undeniable conviction in his heart about God's existence. Bulent had a sincere desire to learn truth and study the beliefs of other religions. After arriving in Utah, he began inquiring about the teachings of the church. Brother Horace Milligan invited Bulut to a fireside in his ward. Although Bulent could not understand much of what was said, he was deeply touched by the Spirit. One Saturday night, while reading the Book of Mormon, Bulent prayed fervently to know if the Savior lives. He fell asleep by his bedside and woke up with no apparent answer. That morning, Bulent went to church with Brother Milligan. As they began to sing the opening hymn, a hymn he had never sung before, it was unmistakably familiar. He then realized that he had been humming that very tune since he had awoken that morning. Bulent then read the title of the hymn, "I Know That My Redeemer Lives," and received, by the power of the Spirit, in that moment, the witness of the living reality of Jesus Christ. All of this in answer to his prayer the previous night. He was baptized in Salt Lake City in 1998 and was subsequently married in the temple. Last year, he was called to serve as president of the Salt Lake Granite Park Stake.
Mahmoud Abenjo was raised a Muslim in Ghana. He attended Islamic schools and was taught how to identify the flaws in Christianity. He remembers learning that Jesus Christ cannot be the Son of God because God is not begotten, neither can he beget, along with some purported biblical contradictions. However, owing to a strong desire to find true religion, he joined 3 different Christian churches successively, but eventually reverted to Islam. After some months, he met the missionaries. He was surprised to learn of the Book of Mormon and of the Word of Wisdom, which piqued his interest. But there was a lingering question. If Christianity and Islam were both claiming that without being Christian or being Muslim, one could not inherit the kingdom of God, then what was to become of his great-grandparents, who knew neither? After the missionaries introduced him to the plan of salvation and the temple, he reported, "One morning on my way to work, as I pondered over these thoughts, I felt a sensation that I had never experienced before in my life. My reaction to this sensation was to start running and shouting, 'I got it! I got it!' Muhammad was baptized, his wife later joined him, and a year later, they and their children were sealed."
Next is the Madrad Nemani family. Madrad Nemani was born and raised in Iran. He chose to study at BYU because of its standards. While attending school, he worked at KBYU. There he had the opportunity to watch the devotionals and messages from general conferences. He felt something that he could not explain whenever he heard the name of the Lord. He knew by what he felt that Jesus was special. He returned home to Iran and began working there, and there he met and married his wife Miriam. In 1995, they returned to BYU for graduate studies, and a daughter Mary was born. He reported, "Everybody around us was so helpful, friendly, and kind. They invited us to their activities in church. The experience we had was very special. They had so much love for someone that was not a member of their church. My wife once said, 'These people are much more Muslim than we are.'" The love and service they express supersedes the Muslims. They follow the commandments of God. They are the true believers. We just talk about it. After a period back in Iran, they returned to the United States, this time to Houston, to pursue a PhD, and they miraculously received a visa. After a few days in Houston, Miriam said, we need to find the Mormons. They did, and they were welcomed in. They knew that conversion was punishable by death if they returned to Iran, but now they were residents of the United States. They knew the gospel was true and made the decision to be baptized. They have been sealed and are now helping on the translation of the Book of Mormon into Farsi, and they express powerful testimonies.
Murat Imamgaziev was raised in a traditional Kazakh village. He married Alma, a school teacher, and they moved to Almaty, where he opened a business selling goods at an open-air market. Murat and Alma had a son and a daughter, Maksat and Sabina. It was in the market where Murat and Alma met a member of the church who invited them to attend activities. They knew soon that they had found the truth, but it took longer for them to sort out and understand the implications it would have for their family and community traditions. Murat carefully looked at the church doctrines and practices related to every aspect of his life, to births, to deaths, to funerals, to holidays, to be sure that he would be able to be a faithful member and honor his family and culture. His son Maksat received his witness early on and wanted to be baptized, but out of respect insisted that he could not be baptized before his father. At his father's urging, Maksat was baptized and was joined a few months later by the rest of the family. Maksat has now served a successful mission to Ukraine and Russia and is engaged to be married in the temple this summer. Sabina is putting in her mission papers to leave after the wedding. The stories of these members provide a small sampling of the way Muslims are encountering the gospel and embracing membership in the church. It is clear that the Lord's hand is upon these people in such diverse places as Asia, Eastern Europe, and the Near East, and West Africa. Elder Kieran will now share some of what we're learning.
A rather remarkable thing and work is unfolding among the Muslims in places where there is a natural confluence of Christianity and Islam. You might say in countries where there is a broad, constitutionally protected religious freedom. Where this work is most effective, it is the result of a natural interest that has developed on the part of individual Muslims, occasioned in part by the confidence that their interest will not invite persecution or reprisal from their family or community. Interest is often founded on a relationship with a good neighbor. This work is most effective also where there is a capable, competent mission president who understands the policy of the church relating to teaching and baptizing Muslims and is willing to hold the missionaries accountable accordingly. This is unfolding without providing special lessons or materials. Current materials are being used effectively with simple adaptations and occasional added emphasis. Missionaries are adept at identifying where special emphasis may need to be placed in the teaching process, following Preach My Gospel guidelines. Perceived obstacles to the conversion of Muslims, such as Jesus Christ being the Son of God and prophets following Muhammad, can be overcome not by reason or deep doctrinal engagement, but rather by the Spirit as missionaries teach the truth, bear testimony, and invite Muslim investigators to ask God and listen to his answer. We're learning that those Muslims who indicate interest in the restored gospel are often spiritual in nature and receptive to the voice of the Spirit. While missionaries may sometimes struggle when teaching other Christians about some of the unique elements of the restored gospel, Muslims can be more prepared to receive them in perhaps unexpected ways. For example, while interested Muslims may initially question the possibility of a prophet after Muhammad, they are not put off by the reality of God speaking to a prophet centuries after Jesus Christ. The same can be said about the reality of additional scriptures such as the Book of Mormon. Even on things where there should be general religious acceptance among Christians, Muslims can recognize the importance of adhering to a divine moral code and the value of dietary guidelines and fasting. They are receptive to the divine origin of the commandment to pay tithes and offerings. They come with a disposition for and a habit of regular prayer. In all of these things, for Muslims enjoying the security of protected religious freedom, their Islamic training and background can prepare them well to receive the restored gospel truths.
There are many things that could be considered as possible steps forward. It may be helpful to think in terms of both short-term efforts and long-term efforts. Among other things, possible short-term efforts could include the following. Identify countries and areas of the world where religious freedom is protected, where there is a sufficient concentration of Muslims to warrant possible missionary activity, and where there is a societal mingling of Christianity and Islam that broadly encourages tolerance and mutual respect. Review the current policy and consider a refinement that would allow and carefully monitor outreach to Muslims in such locations. In such locations, allow for respectful and measured proselyting among Muslims and provide the means for those Muslims who indicate interest in the church to be taught and baptized, subject to careful adherence to approved guidelines. Consider individual mission by mission authorization for outreach efforts in approved locations. Provide specialized training for mission presidents of approved missions. Consider translating into target languages existing materials that would be useful in approved missions. Consider providing periodical language training at the MTC in targeted languages to assist in the measured and monitored expansion of the work in approved missions. Long-term efforts might include the following. Continue bridge building efforts with key people and organizations like those Elder Piper mentioned earlier. Foster a receptive environment within the church for Muslim converts through education and integration. And develop Muslim converts through leadership opportunities that would prepare them for future service whenever and wherever the Lord may call.
Neither Elder Oaks or Elder Holland are here who provide our direction in this committee. President, we've enjoyed this assignment. It's a challenging assignment, but we've followed that direction. In 1980, shortly after the revelation on priesthood was received, a member of this quorum said the following.
Looking ahead, we see the gospel preached in all nations and to every people with success attending. We see the Lord break down the barriers so that the world of Islam and the world of communism hear the message of the restoration. And we glory in the fact that Ishmael as well as Isaac and Esau as well as Jacob shall have an inheritance in the eternal kingdom. We see congregations of the covenant people worshiping the Lord in Moscow and Peking and Saigon. We see saints of the Most High raising their voices in Egypt and India and Africa. We see stakes of Zion in all parts of the earth, and Israel, the chosen people, gathering into these cities of holiness, as it were, to await the coming of their King.
That's the report of our work, President.
President, just a comment that I think will be of interest to everybody. We've got Al Jazeera here this week, and you're working with them, and Richard Hinckley's taking them through a guided tours, and he was looking at that. I think this was said once before, but Elder Ballard and I were in New York to see Fox News and meet with the Wall Street Journal editorial board, and Al Jazeera sent word through Ahmed, our public affairs, the African American there, that they really wanted to have a broadcast to the Arabic world. This was December of 2007. They were intensely interested that Mitt Romney was a Mormon. It was the last election, and they wanted to have somebody come on. I was quite reserved about doing that, but Elder Ballard asked, well, how many people would see it? And they said millions. And Elder Ballard said, I'll do it. And so we went down to Al Jazeera's studio, and they had a very respectful moderator there. And I got to listen as he had the interview with him. Elder Ballard basically went through a first lesson, first discussion in Preach My Gospel, based on the questions that were asked. And I listened to it, and they were supposedly translating what was going on. And Elder Ballard said, and Joseph Smith was a prophet, and what I heard come back was Arabic language that said something about Muhammad, which hadn't been said. I'm sure they said that. Of course, we know that there's no prophet but Muhammad. It was shown on December 23rd or 24th, 2007, to millions of people in the testimony under the first lesson. And I subsequently had when I was in Washington, D.C., a couple of years later, this man came up to me, this young man, he says, I heard Elder Ballard do that. I speak Arabic. I tried to find out what he was doing. I decided he was with the CIA because he wouldn't tell me what he was doing. But I asked him if he would get me an English transcript of what had been said in Arabic so that I could see what had actually ended up going out. And he sent that to me, and it really was a wonderful first lesson to millions of people over Al Jazeera, December 23rd, 2007, or December 24th, 2007. In the context of, we want you to know what one Mormon candidate believes that is running for President of the United States. That was the context that went on.
Russell, I might add that when I went to Turkey last June to see if we could make some progress there, this President Bulut was very helpful to me in what I might say to that think tank who wanted to know something about our church. But I haven't seen him before. You've shown this picture. A most remarkable story. He was a great help to us. And incidentally, when the Europe East Area Presidency reports to the Area Committee, they're about the next one up, or so they will close with their comments on the progress that's been made in Turkey, where you have this great opportunity of preaching Christianity in an Islamic country. They will end their presentation with our progress in Turkey.
I think it's very significant what's going on in Toronto, because there are a lot of people of Islam that have moved into Toronto, and I'm grateful to see that we're finally actually trying to do what they're starting to do up there. And there are a lot of other places just like Toronto, I think. So your ideas about picking what missions we can work on are, to me, spot on.
We have President of Toronto Mission here. We ought to hear from him.
Well, Elder Ballard's exactly right. There's a large enclave of those that have the Islam faith. We had, when I was there, probably 100 members of the church between two different branches. It was interesting that a number of them told me that we have participated in the Islam culture, but we have many reservations about the Islam faith. And that's what's opened our minds here to the missionaries, and with some limited approval, we actually had missionaries who wanted to learn Farsi on their own, which was the language from Iran. and remarkably, these missionaries learned this very difficult language on their own. It is. It's just incredible what they could do. I spent a day with one of them, and I saw him with various people from Iran come in, and he would write on the board from right to left, talk with them, they'd interchange. We went out on the streets, we were just talking with people, and you saw these two young ladies, probably young adults, walk by, asked them if they had an interest in the church, and they said they had no interest whatsoever. And then he must have detected they were from Iran, and he started to speak to them in Farsi, and they just stopped dead in their tracks and talked with him for, well, it wasn't a long time, but maybe 5 or 7 minutes. It just opened the door. So I think little by little the door is opening, and certainly Toronto is one of those, I think, key locations.
Thank you.
One of the preparations, I think, in addition to how we talk to them, but it's preparing our members and how to receive them. We're getting a lot of bias developed when we listen to the news with the terrorist activities and the perception that these are not
right.
Exactly. So I think that's part of the plan that needs to be incorporated.
I just add one other thing from when I was in Toronto to being up there a year and a half ago. It's like you can't believe the change of the congregation. It's like the United Nations up there. I mean, we held a stake conference, and I couldn't believe what I was looking at. And so that we've got to get to those. That's the way we're going to get to a lot of those nations. And I don't think they have a problem being assimilated in that. Maybe it's Utah where we got to work.
I think that's we hear some stories of people coming to church and then being asked questions that reflect ignorance on the part of the members.
We've got to fix that.
Don't open the door for them.
Patrick, a year and a half ago when I was in England, I wanted to go where President Hinckley's first apartment was.
Yeah.
It's totally Muslim, isn't it? In that whole area.
It is.
45 Wadham Road.
45 Wadham Road. There isn't a born Englishman within many, many miles.
Indonesia has the largest percentage of Muslim population of any country in the world. We have a mission there. There are 10 million Christians in Indonesia.
We now have a stake there too, President. We have a stake there too.
That's right, just recently. There's been a lot of contacts through that.
Those were reported in the Asia report, and they focused on those 3 Muslim nations of Malaysia, Pakistan, and Indonesia, and we kind of tried not to retread that territory or go to Turkey where we know that Europe East is focused. So we're in contact, and we're trying to provide a supporting role and seeing what we can do at headquarters to support them in their efforts.
I think this is important for our brethren to know, that as we branch out, even though it's in another area, you're very much part of it in instructing them. You help with Dennis Neuenschwander and his wife in getting things started in Turkey. We're grateful.
Anything else?
Great report.
Well done, sir.
Fascinating.
Well done.
Thank you.